Everyone, and welcome back to the channel. Today I want to talk about and show you a clip of the outspoken George Galloway, former MP for many seats and independent. He's a former Labour MP and he's got a lot of knowledge when it comes to Eastern Europe and specifically Russia and Ukraine. Now, we've had a lot of talk recently about Donald Trump and his views on Zelenskyy, the president of Ukraine. So it's interesting to see what George Galloway has to say on Trump's comments about Zelenskyy being a dictator and his popularity in his country, and what George Galloway thinks about the future of Zelenskyy and Ukraine and Russia. So take a look at this clip and then we'll talk about it.
To make it illegal for him to negotiate with Russia. In any case, his presidential term has now long elapsed. He is an illegitimate president, or as Donald Trump called him today, he is a dictator who has banned the opposition parties, who has exiled or imprisoned opposition politicians, who has placed his main rival under house arrest in Kiev in preparation for charges against him of corruption. And the idea that Zelenskyy, as a dictator, unelected, with 4% approval rating in the country, according to Donald Trump, can win a presidential election is, of course, entirely fanciful. So Russia will sit down under the shadow of the demise, political demise, one hopes, of Zelenskyy, and will seek to find light in negotiations.
So there we see George Galloway, as George Galloway always is, not holding back. And he makes a few accusations which I've checked out and are true, stuff that I didn't know. And apparently Zelenskyy has locked up his main political opposition on house arrest while waiting charges for corruption, which would fit in with what Donald Trump's saying about Zelenskyy being a dictator. Apparently there are many political opponents of Zelenskyy now in prison because they've called martial law. He hasn't had an election, which isn't uncommon when there's a war, but it's certainly getting time, in many people's opinion, for Zelenskyy to have an election, whether that's possible while you're in law. Galloway goes on to say that he hopes it's the demise of Zelenskyy. And it seems to be quite a common theme coming forward now, that the president that we've seen in the House of Commons, that we've seen over in the House in America, being kind of propped up as this hero for freedom, is kind of coming crashing down. It seems like Ukraine is more corrupt than any country on the planet when you actually peel back the nonsense which the Western world have been telling us about Zelenskyy. Now, as for the Ukraine people fighting back against Russia, you can't knock them whatsoever. They love the country and they're fighting for the future of the country. But that doesn't mean that we can't look at what Ukraine is, because it is vital. If Ukraine is a corrupt nation led by a dictator, many questions around elections, then certainly we should be able to ask the question and speak about what has caused the war. Now, George Galloway, and it seems Donald Trump is hinting on it, seem to believe that Ukraine may have been at fault or partly at fault for the start of the war. Now, I would hope, as someone who doesn't want to see any war, that there was always an alternative for Vladimir Putin rather than going to war. And Russia has all the same accusations against its country as Ukraine does. But it certainly seems evident more and more as this war goes on that the things that we've been told by the mainstream media are not exactly true. For instance, why hasn't Zelenskyy tried to come up with any deal? Why has he passed a law making it illegal for him to actually even negotiate with Russia? Every single war that there's ever been, the two sides at some point have tried to negotiate an end to the war. For what it's worth, my opinion's this: the Western powers was desperate to try and weaken Russia and do not care about Zelenskyy or the troops. And I think Zelensky now has got himself way above his head in this conflict. And I don't think he has a way out of it. I think he is now controlled by gangsters in Ukraine. He knows if the war comes to an end, he's probably going to lose the election. Who knows? He could possibly even be assassinated in that corner of the world. But he has took so much money off the West, the European Union, the UK, the United States of America, that until Trump got in, he was basically blackmailed to carry it on. We've all heard the stories. In 2022, there was a deal on the table that would give Ukraine most of its territory back. But Boris Johnson flew out to tell Zelensky now is not the time to end the war. That's not what the West wants. So whatever Zelensky is, I actually feel sorry for him because it seems to me like he has been played by the West. The West needs a boogeyman in Vladimir Putin. And that brings me on to my next question. And I want you to please comment in the comment section and tell me whether you think in an ideal world where NATO was not trying to encroach on Russia, would Russia have ever invaded Ukraine, or would Russia have been happy how things was? That's a question that I don't know the answer to, and I'd be really interested in hearing what you've got to think. But in closing on this video, George Galloway believes that Zelensky is basically a crook who's going to get kicked out of office. He tells us how he's made a law where he can't negotiate and he's locking up his political prisoners in a dictatorship. And that certainly mirrors what Donald Trump and Russia have been saying, especially in Russia's case, all this time. Thank you all for watching. Please like, share and subscribe, and I'll see you on the next video.